Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nerding Out on Neurodiversity, the podcast for all things neurodivergence. I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski, clinical psychologist and professional speaker, and I'm happy to be your host through the wild trails of the neurodivergent world.
And I'm Jake Noonan, educational coach and humanities teacher, your co-host and producer, and I'm thrilled to help share the stories and the experiences of wonderful people in the world of neurodiversity.
We're really excited for today's guest, which we are going to say a lot because we're always really excited about every guest we get. So let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Nerding Out on Neurodiversity. I'm Dr. Matt Zakreski, here as always with my co-host, Mr. Jake Noonan. Jake, say hi.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with all of you, and we're so thrilled to talk with our guest today, Dr. Ellen Williams.
We are really excited to talk to Dr. Ellen today. Not only does she have a fabulous accent, but she is such a leading light in the world of gifted education. And even in our pre-conversation, Jake and I were like, oh yeah, you're one of us. So Dr. Ellen, thank you for being here with us today. Would you mind telling our listeners about yourself and who you are, where you're from, what do you do?
Thank you for having me here today. As you said, my name is Ellen Williams, and my background has always been in public education. I have taught second, third, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade before I moved up to being an administrator for gifted and talented in Cypress Fairbanks ISD, which is one of the largest school districts in the state of Texas. And then in 2004, I moved out to Kerrville, Texas, which is in the beautiful hill country. And our entire school population had fewer children in it than the gifted population in Cy-Fair. So we're talking 100,000 versus 5,000 in population. But I've learned a lot from both a rural school district as well as a suburban. And what I care most about is that highly intelligent children are not overlooked as, oh, they'll get it. It's fine. They're smart. So it's a golden ticket. Nothing's going to go wrong. And so I've really dedicated my master's degree is in gifted education. My doctoral dissertation was on what do high school students that are identified as gifted and were accelerated, meaning they skipped one or more grades. What did they find stressful in public high school? And the result of my study was that boredom was the number one thing that they found to be stressful. I have worked on a couple of books, I've done some articles, and I just really like the opportunity to talk about gifted education. And now that I am retired, I'm working more and more to talk about the importance of emotional regulation skills for gifted children, because sometimes I think that's the missing piece.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think you just described the fusion of what Jake and I do, right? I mean, as the psychologist in the practice, the emotional regulations where I drive the bus, and we count on Jake to provide really targeted and informed best practices in education. Also, I just have to nerd out for a second here. So you worked in Kerrville. Kerrville is where the Museum of Western Art is, right?
Yes, it is. That's right.
So many years ago, before I was a psychologist, I worked in educational travel, and we had an event for a bunch of teachers in San Antonio, and we took them out on the town Thursday night, Friday. They had a choice of activities. Some people wanted to go to the Museum of Western Art, and our bus driver never showed up. So they said, well, okay, well, go get a van and you drive them. I was like, you want me to drive? I was 24. I was driving from San Antonio to Kerrville, Texas to see the Museum of Western Art. So when he said, I was like, wait, I know I've been there. That's such a weird small world thing.
It's a wonderful museum. We're very proud of it.
Wow, that's so weird. Okay, so tell me this, Dr. Ellen, why do you think gifted education consistently gets the short shift? Like, why are we at the bottom of the poll, as it were?
After 35 years of experience working with gifted children, I believe that generally there's a couple of different theories as to why it is, but some people see gifted education as elitist, that, oh, it's only for the privileged. And it may be true because of inconsistent identification that in some districts, when you look at who's in the gifted class, it isn't equitable to the population of the school. That's a separate problem. That doesn't mean gifted doesn't exist. That means that there's an inequitable identification process. And I have a whole separate book on that. So I worked with Dr. Ruby Payne and updated the third edition of this book called Removing the Mask, How to Identify Giftedness in Students from Poverty. I don't think that any district does as good a job as they should on finding giftedness in all populations. When I was working on my master's, one of the things that we were taught was that, what is gifted? What does that mean? And you've heard some teachers say, or some parents, well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. In reality, there is one school of thinking that children who are gifted have a thicker myelin sheath on the axons in their brain. So the thoughts can go from one dendrite to another faster. They can draw conclusions. They can make predictions and all much faster than they learn faster. They just think faster. Unfortunately, brain dissection is not part of our identification process, and it never will be. But I do believe that there are some children that come into this world regardless of their economic background, their race, their religion, or anything else, that they think differently. And that's why I like your work about, and the term of neurodiversity. It is a range, just like autism is a range. There are some people who are gifted and fit the high achieving mold better. And those are the ones we like. And then we have the gifted, which may be much higher intelligence. We can't say for sure, but they're just out there. And maybe they have some autistic tendencies or other issues or labels that we put on them. But those highly gifted people that don't fit the mold, that make other people feel inferior or threatened, and they're like, well, they're just weird. In school, many teachers think gifted children are going to get it anyway, and they are focusing on below average students just to get them up to the median, the middle. And one of the unfortunate side effects of No Child Left Behind was that it kind of put a cap on what children could learn. And it's important to bring those children up. I don't want any child left behind. And my mantra for the last 20 years or more was that we want every child to reach their individual potential based on their individual ability. And I don't care if a child has a learning disability or is autistic or is whatever their label is. We want them to do their very, very best. And that should include the gifted. And the prisons are full of gifted people. They're not all stupid because they got caught and are in jail. There is a lot of research, and there are many examples that I could give you. One of the papers that I wrote after the Sandy Hook massacre is that there are a lot of these people who have done school shootings and all that participated in a gifted program at different times. There's University of Virginia, the Columbine, Sandy Hook. There are participants in those shootings that are highly intelligent people who have social and emotional issues that have not been resolved. Their needs have not been met, regardless of their intelligence. And so I think that's where emotional regulation is important, because for gifted children, they're not going to get these skills on their own. They need to be taught, and they can be taught, because no matter how smart you are, everyone has feelings. And those are good feelings. You need those feelings, that you have a right to have those feelings. You do not have the right to express those feelings in such a way that it harms someone else. And so learning how to feel your feelings, but still behave in an appropriate manner for society is a huge tool, a gift that we can give intelligent children. And I feel like that if we promote that more in education, that we will have more children who are identified as gifted be successful. I'm sure both of you have met individuals who, as an adult, you went, they are so smart. They have been smart their whole life, but bless their heart, they haven't accomplished anything. They've never done anything with that. And that's why, for example, Sally Reese and Joseph Renzulli at the University of Connecticut see giftedness truly defined as intelligence as well as persistence. And, a third thing of you put all this together with emotional regulation and all to be the whole successful adult. And I feel that intelligence is something to be celebrated and not masked. One of the things that I know for a fact, and this is not my opinion, is that there are many children in high school and somewhere along the way, and somewhere sixth grade and up, where especially girls will mask their intelligence to fit in.
Yep.
And in many cases, to do that, they will self-medicate. And so part of the drug prevalence among gifted children, and it is there, not all, this is not a statement of all, but it is a concern that, like Willie Nelson says, why do you smoke so much pot? And he says to quiet the rage, but to fit in with what's normal. And highly creative, gifted people especially may self-medicate so that they fit in better and feel normal. So there's a lot of issues there. But I don't think that gifted children should be overlooked. They're not going to get it on their own. I believe they should be celebrated and nurtured. And looking back now, I have students now that are in their 40s and have their own children. And I know gifted children who I taught, and I feel like they are still my children, that are PhDs, a podiatrist, an anesthesiologist, many different doctors in different fields, a Harvard Law lawyer that I'm very, very proud of, one of the smartest children I ever met. One of my favorite former students had a PhD in theoretical linguistics. And I don't know what that is because it's theoretical. But
yeah, I don't know what that is
but he
either.
went to Boston College and he really works on languages and he's traveled all over the world with that. And I celebrate those people, and it is not because they came from middle class or upper income families. The ones I have mentioned, yes, they're white, but regardless of their background or their race, people like Oprah Winfrey, there are hundreds of people of color and from poverty that have accomplished great things. And one of the things that I learned from Dr. Ruby Payne when I've worked with her as a consultant is that any child can grow up to reach their potential as an adult if they have a role model, someone who not just to copy, but who believes in them. I believe in you and what you can do, and to be that mentor for them, and an education and a job. And as a teacher, we were told, and I believe, that we can give those children two of those three things. We can be the person that inspires them. We can be the person who gave them the education. And then if they can get employed, they can pull themselves out of poverty or whatever condition they're in and be Dolly Parton and make the world a better place through persistence, along with their intelligence and their drive. Giftedness is something to be celebrated and not ignored, in my opinion.
I mean, that was one of the best speeches I've ever heard in any podcast I've ever been on. And congratulations on being the first person on this podcast to reference Willie Nelson. Uh, but we got Willie and Dolly in there. I mean, if we get George straight, we got the holy trinity of country music. Uh, gosh, Jake, I am digesting. You ask a question.
Whew, that was a lot in like the absolute best possible way.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. You're talking about my passion. This is what I work for. This is what I believe in. So if it's about gifted education, I appreciate getting to talk about it.
Oh, and I absolutely like adore that, like 100%. And I wrote down a couple notes just so I would remember specific things that you talked about. So one thing that I really, really did want to hear your perspective on and a little bit more detail on is, for context, I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia, and I was tested gifted in kindergarten, joined the gifted program, and from a very young age realized it was all just white kids in my class. So I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit more on the inequity that you see within giftedness and how that impacts people from such a young age, such as kindergarten even.
Yes, it is difficult. First off, in Texas, we are required by code to identify children as young as kindergarten. It used to be third grade. And I have mixed feelings on that because, yes, if they test into it, then that child needs to be served. But I believe that there are many children in that age group that have not yet had the exposure to experiences to build the vocabulary to do well on the tests that we administer. And that doesn't mean they're not gifted. They just didn't pass that test. And so one of the things that I believe in is to not depend on one instrument, because there is bias in instruments and not every instrument test what you might be gifted in. Now, some districts have used only a nonverbal test like the Naglieri.
Mhm.
But there's problems with the Naglieri. One is if you're colorblind, you don't do well on that test because it's in blue and yellow. And that's not a good test for you. But also, it's only nonverbal. I'm not gifted in nonverbal. That is not my area. And I have no artistic ability, or one of my professors had said that if you have some strong nonverbal ability, you will do well in calculus because you can visualize the space beneath the curve, something like that. I didn't even take that course, so I don't know. But that was, to give an example of that kind of giftedness. There are tests that, like I tend to lean toward a Stanford
Mhm.
and a COGAT. COGAT is as an ability test, Stanford as an achievement test, because it looks individually at nonverbal, verbal, and quantitative reasoning. And some districts want to go only for that cumulative score. But I believe that it is more accurate if you break it down and just look at the individual ones, because I've had children score way high in the math area and in an average range in the other. Well, if you put it all together, they come up a little bit above average. But why aren't we serving that math? If that's what they're really gifted in, go with that. My story to go with this is that I had a student who I still keep in touch with, and he's one of those students. I think he's 38 now. He's the same age as my daughter, but he was very gifted in language, and he could read at an adult level in the third grade. And when the rest of us were reading Sarah Plain and Tall, he came to school dressed in a suit with a bookcase, briefcase, and did a book report on the John Grisham novel. The lawyer went, oh, darn it, I lost my words, which is why I'm not in the classroom anymore, because this happened. The Firm, I got it. Okay. So he did a book report on The Firm. He could read at an adult level, but at the end of third grade, he was very average in math. And if he might be a little below average, because my goal in third grade is you teach a child to multiply and where you have to carry the number, and to divide, do long division and all. And I never could get him. He didn't master that in third grade. And that just wasn't his area of strength. Does that mean he's not gifted? No. He had a linguistic skill. And so he went on, he did great. He went to A&M and graduated, and as an adult is a fine and wonderful young man. But I really worked with him in his area of strength and differentiated for that one thing, because I needed him to get the basics in math. And I regret that I never was able to get him to do it, to multiply and carry right. That is something I think is missing in our education system, is that kind of differentiation that goes to the kid and what the individual needs rather than to the group and what the standards say they have to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely does.
As far as identification, I'm sorry that I kind of got off from what your original question was. The answer is, in my opinion, you need multiple assessments and tailored, just like that I differentiated the curriculum to differentiate the method to the kid. I also believe that in this book that I helped write on removing the mask, which you may want to look into, that you use other data collection points other than just grades, because in kindergarten and in first grade, second grade, the teacher's job is to give those children the experiences and the vocabulary that they have not been exposed to yet. And by about third grade, they're going to catch up to that. They're gonna look more like other gifted children. And here's an interesting concept that I want you to think about. And I feel really bad in this. I want to edit this out and start me back over at the question, but because I got off track.
You're just a delight.
Well, I know exactly what I want to tell you, but my mind wanders. So hang on just a moment.
Spoken like a true gifted student. Just say.
I've got a 69-year-old grandma brain right now, so I apologize. Okay, I'm going to get back on track. Let me think about it. I'm talking about identification. Oh, here's an interesting thing I want you to think about. Children in poverty don't know less than those that are in middle class or that are wealthy. They know they have a different set of skills, a different knowledge base. Okay. Now, because they are in poverty, they may have been responsible for going to the store and buying the groceries because mom's and dad's at work. They may have changed the diapers. They may have fed a younger sibling. They have had to problem solve, taking care of things and getting things done when maybe they didn't have internet access. And I know that during COVID, we had children going to McDonald's to use the Wi-Fi because they did not have it at home. They problem solved. That's a huge skill. Whereas children in wealth are in middle class, upper middle class. And when I mean that, I mean economic class, not as a negative thing, but just the resources that they have things done for them by a parent or a servant or a caretaker. So they don't have the same experiences. And if you say, fix your breakfast, other than pouring a bowl of cereal, they may not know how to do it. They don't know how to cook for themselves. They certainly don't know how to mix a bottle of formula or change. They have not had to do things because they've been so privileged. And privilege has a lot to do with who gets into a gifted program. And if they are from poverty, I think we need to meet them at what is their knowledge base and what do they need to know how to do really well, and look at their communication skills, because children who come from poverty often have a really mature sense of humor. That's how they communicate with people. Their resources are in their relationships with other people. That's how they get by. In our poverty workshop, we talk about in middle class, you call AAA. And if your car breaks down in poverty, you call Uncle Al.
Yeah.
You got to have this relationship. It's a trade-off of things. And they may be very good. You want to know who's really gifted? I think one of the things is ask the kids in the class anonymously, in this class, who do you think is the smartest person? And you'll see that it's not just who you like, but it's who's good. Who do you go to fix something like your bike's broken, Or who do you know that is really good at solving problems, bringing people together? Who's the good collaborator? Who's the funniest person in the class? Who get those qualities that we don't associate with intelligence is a kind of resource, part of their basket of tools that they use to get through the world. And in those situations, that kind of neurodiversity isn't valued as much as it should be and nurtured, because they can become great leaders because of their communication skills, their people skills. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it definitely did. And I feel like I'm going to keep saying this. I like love the answer that you gave and everything that you've been talking about surrounding it.
Just edit around it.
It's something that definitely like speaks to at least like my experience growing up was always questioning like why are my other classmates where like 6% of our school was white, why is the other 94% not really being seen or identified or served at all?
And that's basically why it's teachers not seeing the value of what they do know. Now, one of the things about gifted education for children who are from diverse backgrounds is looking at economic class and the number of words that a child from middle class or upper class is exposed to in one-to-one conversations. And in poverty, there is a much lower number of words that they hear with another person. That limits the way the brain works. Now, there is no current research, zero, that says that children learn as well or better from an electronic screen as they do from one-on-one communication. There is a lot of research that says vocabulary development, especially, is best learned in one-on-one conversations with an adult. There's a lot of research that supports that. And if you're in poverty and you're the mom and you're worried about safety and food and shelter, those basic things, your vocabulary is very different from a person who is above that on Maslow's hierarchy of, I have all these things and now I'm up here being self-actualized. Let's say a mother is sitting on a couch, like I'm right now, I'm sitting here by a big window, and there was a couch here, and a child's on the couch, and they look out the window, and right now out in my yard, I've got hummingbirds. I must have a dozen around the feeder out here. And the baby goes, bud. And the mama goes, do you see that bird? What does the bird say? Can you see flying? What's he doing? Blah, da, 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 da. You're teaching your child words. Whereas in poverty, the mother will go, shut that window, that's not safe. Put that curtain over. We have kids in San Antonio that just recently got shot through the wall in the apartment from a drive-by. So, and there's not that conversation. It's just be safe. Shut that window. Don't look out that window. Keep that curtain closed. Same thing in the grocery store. As my example is a mama in her yoga pants with her Starbucks cup is walking with the stroller through Target, okay? And the baby is like, reaches for the orange and goes, ball, ball. And the mama goes, that's an orange. Picks it up. How does this orange feel? Do you feel it's bumpy, isn't it? And let's feel this apple. Is this a ball? No, this isn't a ball. This is an apple. What color's the apple? The apple's red, the orange is orange. You giving them all these words to build on. The mama in poverty is walking through the grocery store with her coupons or her, we call it a Lone Star debit card, but her government card for groceries. And if the child says ball, that keep your hands out, keep your hands in the basket. All she's worried about is, am I going to have enough money to buy your diapers and the basic food that I need? And her mind is thinking about that. She's not thinking about enriching the language of that child. And that's why these children do not do well in kindergarten to be tested, because their language is not developed enough to pass the test we give them. It'll get there with exposure to language through school. They're more likely to qualify in third grade. And it's absolutely true. I'll tell you something else about testing kids too young, especially boys. And so you two gentlemen may appreciate this. In kindergarten, first and second grade, every question is read aloud to the child, and they have to wait for the next question. Oh, don't you go ahead. Don't look, you stay with me. Look at this. And those little boys just turn that off. And they may start making a pattern or circling things randomly or turning the page. And they're like, that child doesn't listen. They're not gifted. Whereas in third grade, they read them the direction, they do one sample, and then they say, you have 18 minutes. Start now. And the kids do remarkably better because they're letting them go at their own pace through a certain amount of time. And I can't tell you the number of children who in kindergarten and first grade, their mothers are going, I know this child is gifted. I don't understand why he isn't qualifying. It's not your child, it's the test. So it's something we have to consider.
There's so much to unpack in everything you're saying. And I actually want to go all the way back to something you said about myelination, right? And how giftedness, part of the reason I ground my work in neuroscience is that I find that when I say to administrators and the stakeholders, I'm like, listen, these are brain differences, right? We don't diagnose by cutting up the brain.
Right,
Maybe someday we'll diagnose by taking fMRIs of the brain.
right.
But like, this is what a gifted brain looks like. This is what an ADHD brain looks like. This is what an autistic brain looks like. Because I can't make them believe, but I can show them evidence.
And that's what Dr. Amen does. I don't know if you know who he is in Irving. And he does all these PET scans. He's done thousands of them. And he can show you differences in the way drugs affect the brain and different kinds of depression. And you're absolutely right. Science is catching up to that. And wouldn't it be wonderful if people believed in it, but also in ways to improve cognition for everybody? As I said, we want everybody to reach their own true potential according to what they bring to the party, to the game. And I think it's important that for gifted children, as well as all other children, it helps if we explain to children who are disengaged from school, think of it as a game. We want you to win this game of school, and these are the rules. And you have to behave this way. You have to sit this way. You have to line up this way. These are the rules. But if you can play this game, you're going to win. And so I think it's important to see education as a game that can be won, and that by using emotional regulation tools, it gives you like get out of jail free card kind of thing in a game of playing this game, because that's what it is. We've set up these artificial environments for children to learn. And there's a lot of talk right now about that the current public education system is set up to raise workers, that can follow directions and do the job. And that really, and I said when I got my doctorate, all a doctorate really is it proves you can follow directions and do it exactly the way they tell you what to do. It doesn't matter what the topic is. They'll walk you through it and you do it exactly their way. And my brother, who is a PhD in chemistry, said he'll never forget. He was at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, that when back in the old days, you handed them the hand-typed dissertation, her taking out a ruler and measuring the margins, and they're like, that wasn't the most important thing, but that's what education is. It's playing a game, and we want our gifted children to be successful at it, just like all the other children. And some of them aren't. I have some horror stories I can tell you about gifted children who were not successful in school despite their brilliance.
Well, and one of the biggest misconceptions out there is that gifted means you'll do well in school.
Exactly. It's a golden ticket. It's like Willy Wonka.
Uh-huh.
And if anything, it's misnamed. If they wouldn't call it gifted and talented, if they call it slightly weird and wonky, or
it's got that alliteration factor, weird and wonky. I mean,
yeah, and it's like they're not like us. They're different, but they're wonderful, but they're different, In some states, giftedness is a part of special education. And with that, that means they get some federal funds. It's not that way in every state, and it's not that way in Texas. It's only funded at the state level, and that's really very little money. It depends on the local individual districts to value it enough to put extra funds with it, to train the teachers to identify children properly, to support the needs of those kids. I just wish it was the same in all. The other thing that, because we've not been able to identify a one way to do it, not only does every state use different criteria, every district uses different criteria. I've moved my family between towns in Texas, and I had to, here I come with my folder, and here's all the proof they were gifted before. Now, would you see if they're gifted to your standards? There is some benefit or validity, I would say, to having different criteria based on what your population is. For example, if you are in Clear Creek ISD in Texas, that's where NASA is. Okay. So they really do have rocket science people there. If you have a child from that environment and they've had exposure to more vocabulary, more experiences, travel, you're going to look for higher scores. Then there are other districts like Houston ISD, which has been taken over by the state because of its problems. They have very different criteria because of their population. They're going to cast a wider net to identify their gifted because of the amount of poverty they have, and they give bonus points, or they try to, it's just one way to try to make it equitable. If you're on free and reduced lunch or have other indicators of poverty, they're going to give extra points on the identification matrix to try to balance that sum. To say, well, we have to look at them differently because they don't have the same experiences. So the rich kids are on one scale in that district, but poor kids are on a different scale that has an adjusted point system to try to make it more equitable. No one has found the right solution yet, but I really appreciate that districts are trying, the ones that are trying to make it closer to reflecting the population of the campus. I am a proponent of, instead of district standards, campus standards, because in some very large districts like Cypress Fairbanks or Houston or any of the inner city kind of things, you have pockets where one school where you live is very wealthy, whether they're all white or not, but just wealth. And another school is a Title I school, very poor. It would make good sense to have different criteria at each of those schools to identify the top 3% of that campus. Now, what happens when a child moves from this campus to this campus? Well, may need to reevaluate based on that school's criteria. Do they fit? But if they don't, what accommodations can be made for this child that's been getting some enrichment over here? Is that need being met in the regular classroom, or are there some extensions that can be offered on a pull-out kind of basis? Because it boils down to the individual child. It really, really does. I see some value in identifying children by campus so that they are equitably served with their peers that are in that campus, the kind of other children that are there. A lot of it boils down to, I have known teachers who believed in their heart in individualization and differentiation, and believed in Carol Tomlinson and a lot of those gurus from the gifted world of education, and do a great job with every child regardless of the label. The label is not what's important. It's what the child needs that's important, in my opinion.
Well, and I think you just gave us our social media tagline for this interview, because that's at the heart of all of this. And I think what we're all advocating for in the different hats and roles we wear is, if kids need different things and we give them those different things, we have to be prepared to follow that as far as it goes, right? If it takes a middle schooler to local community college, then that's where we're going to go. That's just where what their needs are. And yes, it pushes on norms and it breaks some standards, but I am a big believer in that the most dangerous words in the English language are, well, we've always done it that way.
Yeah.
We're all paradigm shifters, right? And I think it's funny mentioning, going back to what you said before about how many people in prison and people who've done some really terrible things have super high IQs. To think of a more contemporary example, Dr. Allen, do you remember a few years ago the whole Firefest debacle? Yeah, we've gone from Willie Nelson to Firefest, Jake, where this is so
Rock and roll.
this guy planned this like music venue concert in the Caribbean, and it's supposed to be super posh, high end. All these influencers were coming, and they got there, and there was like 4 medical tents, some sandwiches, and no stage. It was, and then nobody could leave the island. It was a whole thing. There's a great documentary on it. But when they're interviewing the guy, Billy, who put this together, this huge con artist, he's talking about growing up in New Jersey like I did. And he's like, oh, yeah, when I was 8, I figured out a way to use the TI-89 calculators as a messaging app, and I would charge kids to tutor them. And I'm sitting there, I was like, of course he's a gifted kid. Of course he is, because to even conceptualize something as insane as Fire Festival, you need to have that kind of brain. And frankly, as Jake and I both know very well from our personal and professional lives, the idea and the follow through can be 2 trains on 2 very different schedules.
And that's why I listened to your podcast about hiring the right person, neurodivergent person. Where's the best place to use them in a company? And in the education ease, we say, are they on the right seat in the bus?
Yep.
And that is exactly this. I mean, he's got the idea, but you need some not gifted, but high achiever, or at least have those organizational skills and a little OCD in there to put it together, and that's more where I am. I am not a big picture creative, but I am very good at putting things together and make things happen. I'm one of those worker bee kind of people, and the world needs those too. We each can find our own seat on the bus, but I want to not let those gifted, creative, wonderful minds self-medicate. I don't want them to be suicidal or depressed. I don't want them to give up on who they are. With social media and the negative aspects of that everybody's read 1,000 studies on, is very dangerous. And if they feel like that there's someone who believes in them and where they're going with it, they can achieve anything. I am very concerned for this generation. I've lost track of the letter system. I think we're up to alpha or something. I don't know. But how unhappy they are. If you feel things very deeply, like some gifted children do, they're very highly sensitive. That's important that you have that feeling. It's valid, but you have to deal with it. And that's part of my book. And what I've talked about is the importance of to build resilience and to not give up on who you really are and what you can contribute to the world, because the world needs you. I have, I think, 15, but it might be more than that, a bunch of stories that are personal stories in my book of what I've experienced in my career, and as a parent and as a grandparent. And I have a grandson who is brilliant. Both of my grandchildren qualified intellectually for being gifted, and this is a perfect example. But my grandson that is dyslexic and has a bad speech impediment and some emotional sensitivities work going on and some OCD. They didn't put him in the gifted program because they had to address all these other things. And they said he'll never be in the classroom learning anything if we're pulling him out for all these things, And so they wound up being in private school where they could differentiate individually. So he's thriving there. And his brother, who is gifted but does not have the other labels and the difficulties, is now a grade ahead of himself. He's in 8th grade. He's taking high school science. And he's like, for the first time in my life, I learned there's something hard at school. I love it. It is so great. I'm learning something I didn't already know, because he has like a photographic memory. And once he reads it and knows it, he'll know it forever. The one who is so bright and is such a good problem solver, he loves escape rooms and those really complicated board games that have all the little characters. And I don't know about all that stuff, but Canaan and there's a million of them, and they're really into that. And boy, can he problem solve. He can't spell anything more than 3 letters. He just can't. Thank God we're in the computer age where he can talk to the computer and it can write it for him. He is creative, he is brilliant, but he has a disability. We had to be sure that he was nurtured where he is so that he can go as far as he wants to go in his strength, but still be supported in the areas where he needs support. And that's what we want for everyone. And we shouldn't have to pay $17,000 to $30,000 a year for his tuition to get what kids need. I don't believe it's necessary. I believe it can be done, but getting through the bureaucracy of public education, especially since COVID, it's just like trying to walk through a swamp. It is so hard. That's my challenge as I go into these. I consider my book, and I'm working on a workbook for children old enough to read. You hate to put a bottom age on it because some kids read beautifully at 5 and others won't till they're 10. But school age children to work through these ideas it's an accompaniment to my book on emotional regulation. It's a workbook for kids. And you know what I hate about the current books that are out there? There's a ton of them, but they all have these very childlike pictures. These dee 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 dee, we're all happy. Bullshit, you're not happy about anything. I want to do it with anime drawings because I think it will appeal more, especially to boys 7 and above. And they don't have to be negative, but I think that they'll think it's cooler than the little bubble-eyed dolls that you see on these drawings in books, And it's not that all the world is sugar plums. It's that you have these feelings. You're right, you do, but you got to deal with it. You feel it, but that is not how you act. And how do you distract yourself? How do you turn away from anger or fear? Or, what choices can you make? Your CBD techniques, your mindfulness strategies, all those things. I'm hoping that I can improve or increase the number of children who take advantage of those kind of things. It's sort of like, and I didn't think about this until I saw a podcast or listened to a podcast the other day between Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Julie Andrews.
Yeah.
And she was saying the song, Raindrops on Roses and Whiskers on Kittens. These are a few of my favorite things. That's CBD therapy. It's like, think happy thoughts and it will make you feel better. I was like, that's brilliant. I never thought of it that way, but self-talk is important. And gifted kids are not as good at that as I want them to be. Too many gifted kids have imposter syndrome. Part of it comes from teachers going, I thought you were gifted. How could you fail this?
Yeah.
What happened? You're gifted. Well, and I cannot tell you the number of times I've gone back and pulled a child's records and say, you're giving them a language arts thing and they're gifted in math.
Right.
So that comes back to identification and using what they're strong in, but building up their weaknesses.
I mean, Jake, I think I could speak for both of us when I say we could probably talk to Dr. Allen for the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
And what I would love to do is offer you to come back, especially when we get that workbook out with those anime characters, because while I'm a pretty talented artist myself, I don't draw anime ones well, but I have a few colleagues who are illustrators who I think would love to do that work for you and think you're right. It's exactly what the kids need. So we're going to do what we always do to wrap up and call this the unofficial end of part 1 of Dr. Ellen, because we'll definitely do a part 2. We're each going to ask you one question we like to wrap up with. My question is, Dr. Allen, if you could have any superhero on speed dial, who would you choose and why?
Wow. My grandsons are so into superheroes and all the Marvel, and I've been to those movies with them. I'm not a superhero kind of follower, so that's a difficult question for me. I would love to have Wonder Woman's rope of truth where I could lasso somebody and hear the truth.
Uh-huh.
What do you really think? What do you really think? Not give me the politically correct version, but what do you really think? That's what I think I'd like.
Oh, that's a great answer. All right, Jake.
My question for you is, what's your favorite word and why?
Oh,
Or it can be like a couple words if needed.
a phrase. I guess I'm going to have to go with it, gifted or multi-potentiality. In that gifted, I want to say just gifted. It's not just one thing. It is not a label that means the same thing in every case, but it means you've been blessed. You've been blessed with an intelligence in some area or in some way that I believe should be nurtured and celebrated while we're pulling up all the things that are not your gifts so that you're equally, can be successful playing this game that we call education. So I'm going to have to go with gifted because I think it encompasses a lot more than most people give it credit for.
I love that.
Amen to that. Yeah. Well, Dr. Allen, this was fabulous. I learned a lot. I'm inspired. I you just it's cool when people meet your expectations. It's even cooler when they exceed them. So, bravo you. You are just such a light in the field, and I'm glad you chose to spend your time with us. I think we feel very honored. Jake is nodding vigorously. Well, then, friends, I will not share any more words. I'm going to digest all this. Dr. Allen, is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. I would love to get to meet you sometime and discuss your work. I had not heard of your center until you contacted me, and I'm impressed with the work you're doing on the East Coast and in your center. And if anything I can do to support you in that, I'm your girl. Okay.
That's awesome. And I will definitely be bending your ear on that at some point. With that note of collaboration and future growth, friends, thank you so much for listening, for being a part of this journey, for learning from us and with Dr. Ellen. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you again soon. Nerding Out on Neurodiversity is brought to you by Dr. Matt Zakreski and the team at the Neurodiversity Collective. To learn more about the Neurodiversity Collective or to be a guest on the podcast, please visit our website at www.theneurodiversitycollective.com/podcast. Audio and production by Jake Noonan. Show your support by subscribing, leaving a 5-star review, and telling your friends about us. Our Instagram and social media handles are at #NoonPodcast, NOON podcast. Your support is appreciated and keeps us going. All discussions presented on this podcast are strictly for informational purposes, awareness, and understanding. The advice presented is not and should not be considered to be therapeutic in nature. If you have any mental health questions, please contact your provider. All rights reserved.